Hello and welcome back to the Air Armoury. I'm JRH and today I'm looking at the Webley Mk II Service air rifle. Although this is known as the Webley Mk II Service, it was technically made by Webley & Scott, who are a British firearms and airgun manufacturer based in Birmingham. They started making guns in the late 19th century, although the company was founded in one form or another a lot earlier than that. They're probably best known for their service revolver, which was the standard issue sidearm for the British Army for a number of years, including throughout the First World War. They started making airguns in the 1920s, and as of 1979 they were only making airguns. And whilst the company has changed hands in the last decade or so, they are still making airguns. So the Mk II Service here was first introduced in 1932 as a replacement for the Mark I rifle, which was manufactured from 1925 to 1932, but this was a bigger, more powerful gun suitable for both target shooting and vermin control. They were officially manufactured from 1932 to 1945, although in reality new production probably only went up as far as the Second World War, with any guns made during the war being assembled from parts that had already been manufactured. Now altogether, Webley made just over 16,000 of the Mk II Service air rifle, and all of them were just marked as the Mk II Service, but there were some small yet significant changes during production. Now as a result, the guns are usually divided up into distinct variants or patterns, which can be identified by their features and roughly correlate to certain serial number ranges. Now a general consensus amongst most sources are that the guns can be divided into three patterns, with the third being by far the most common, but Christopher Thrale, in his excellent book Webley Air Rifles 1925 to 2005, actually breaks them up into 6 patterns. My rifle here is either a third or fourth pattern, depending on whose classification you use. Now this video will focus primarily on this gun, as this is the one I've got to hand, but I will point out the key differences to the other patterns throughout the video. So let's take a closer look at the Webley Mk II Service air rifle. The Mk II Service is a spring piston break barrel air rifle, but like with the Mark I rifle and most if not all of Webley's air pistols, it's not a conventional break barrel design. So although the barrel is still the cocking lever, it is located above the main cylinder or compression chamber rather than in front of it. So the unusual thing about that cocking mechanism is the direction of travel of the piston. So in most spring piston guns, the spring and piston are located behind the barrel, so they travel forwards away from the shooter. But on the Mk II Service here, the spring and piston travel backwards towards you, pushing the air up into the breech here. The barrel itself is secured in place with this bolt handle attached to a rotating collar. So if I open the bolt all the way over, it releases the barrel. And the way that works is there is a locking surface on the inside of that collar, which interacts with this cutout in the barrel to hold it securely in place. And you can see there's actually some give in the barrel, and that's because this locking surface in the collar is actually angled, so that when the bolt handle is turned down, it actually cams the barrel back to hold it tightly in place against the breech seal, which is actually located in this collar here, not on the barrel itself. So this distinctive bolt handle locking mechanism is one of, if not the main features that this rifle is known for, and it's the only Webley airgun to use this mechanism, despite other guns using the barrel over cylinder mechanism. So this bolt handle is the final version, but there were slightly different bolt handles on the earlier patterns of Mk II Service, which had longer bolt handles with a smaller non-knurled ball on the end. It weighs 6.72 pounds or 3.05 kilograms, so it's a little bit on the heavy side, but not significantly so, and it's nicely balanced when shouldering and shooting the rifle. Now it's 41.5 inches or 106 centimeters long, Now the length is fine, but it does feel like it has quite a short length of pull, and it has a 25.5 inch or 64 3/4 centimetre long rifled barrel, and the barrel is actually removable. Now this was done both for storage, especially if you'd purchased one of Webley's hard cases for the rifle, but also to allow you to swap barrels to change the calibre. So when the Mark II Service was first released in 1932, it was available in either 177 or 22, and you could buy an additional calibre barrel as an optional extra. Then in 1937, Webley released a 2.5 version, which they advertised as for rook and rabbit shooting. To remove the barrel, you first need to unlock it using the bolt handle, and then just push in this spring-loaded button on the left-hand side and pull the barrel out, which releases it from this barrel sleeve. And that is held in place because that spring button interacts with this cutout in the track in the bottom of the barrel. So to replace the barrel, put it back in, line it up at the bottom, push the button, and then just push it back until it clips into place. Now the first pattern of Mark II Service actually had a slightly different mechanism for changing and retaining the barrel, and these are visibly different as they have a curved metal spring underneath the barrel here. These apparently tended to break, so were replaced with this push button mechanism from the second pattern onwards. It features a one-piece buttstock with no fore-end like we're used to on most modern air guns. Now I don't personally find it as comfortable as a longer sporter style stock, but it's perfectly usable and you can still get a good enough hold on this trigger block or the main cylinder. Now the stocks were generally made of walnut, although some of the very late guns, which Christopher Thrale refers to as the 6th pattern, had birch stocks. It then has a small section of checkering and a butt plate on the back of the gun. Now the butt plate is nicely shaped and has some grooves to add grip when you shoulder the rifle, and whilst it looks like it's made of plastic, it's actually made of buffalo horn, and because of that they are prone to breaking if knocked against things or rested on the floor. Now the whole gun is made to a very high standard. It really is excellent quality. The checkering on the stock is hand cut, and all of the metal parts are precision machined rather than cheaper stampings. It's then all held together with a mixture of screws and pins, and then all the metal parts have a blued finish, although mine has started to brown in places due to age and use, which I think actually gives it some nice character. In terms of sights, the front sight is a small post or blade set into a metal ramp, and it's held in place in a dovetail so it can be adjusted for windage by tapping it to either side. The rear sight, which is mounted on the barrel sleeve, is a simple notch, but it is height adjustable using this wheel underneath it. There are no markings on the sight, and it doesn't adjust in incremental clicks or anything, but it is held in place in a dovetail, so it is adjustable for windage. Now it's quite a basic sight, but the sight picture is okay. Now this was actually the final style of rear sight, which was subsequently used on Webley's Mark III rifle, but earlier patterns had different rear sights. The first pattern had a 2-position flip-up sight, and the second and third patterns featured a click-adjustable wheel in front of the sight blade here. Now, as well as the standard rear sight, the Mark II Service also featured a flip-up aperture sight at the back. Now the first and second patterns had a side-mounted aperture which folded backwards, but from the third pattern onwards they moved to this style, which is a much sturdier centrally mounted sight which flips forward. This is of course adjustable for both elevation and windage using these dials. Given the age of the gun, you obviously can't mount a scope, but it's nice to have the option of rear sights. The trigger is single stage and isn't adjustable, but it is nice enough. It's comfortable and brakes okay with very little creep. Now my rifle here doesn't have a safety, but the first pattern and some of the second pattern guns did have a manual safety located on the right hand side of the trigger block, which when engaged blocked the trigger. It does have a safety feature of sorts though, which Webley called an Intercepting Sear. Now the main sear, which is used to release the piston when the trigger is pulled, is obviously located underneath the main cylinder inside here, but on top of the main cylinder between it and the barrel we have this piece in here, which is the Intercepting Sear. If I open the action, I can show you how that works. So this Intercepting Sear is pushed down into this cutout in the main cylinder under spring pressure, and when the piston is cocked, that actually holds onto the piston to prevent it moving, so that if you accidentally pull the trigger or something whilst the barrel is open, it can't move because it's being held on that sear. Then when the barrel is closed, that actually pushes down on the intercepting sear to release the spring pressure, which allows you to pull the trigger and fire the gun once the barrel and action is closed properly. Turning now to look at the markings on the rifle, starting on the left hand side. On the main cylinder we have Webley Service Air Rifle Mark II. Then on the trigger block, manufactured by Webley & Scott Limited, Birmingham, England. And then on the side of the breech block, the Webley winged bullet logo and W and S, obviously for Webley & Scott. Then turning the gun over, we have a patent number on the breech block, and then a whole list of international patents on the main cylinder. For the serial number, we have to look at the back of the trigger guard, although some of them early guns were stamped on the side. All of the serial numbers are prefixed with the letter S, with this one being S12311. Now, approximate serial number ranges are S1 to S1000 for the first pattern, S1001 to S2000 for the second pattern, and S2001 to S16000 and change for the third pattern, although Christopher Thrale further subdivides those into S11001 to S14500 for the fourth pattern, S14501 to S15000 for the fifth pattern, and S15001 to S16300 for the sixth pattern. Then near the trigger guard on the underside of the stock there is Made in England stamped into the wood. Now this is somewhat worn on my gun, but you might just be able to make out the M at the beginning, and I believe that was actually only marked on later guns. There are then a couple of markings on the barrel, which I shall remove in order to be able to show you. On the side of the barrel we have .22 caliber. Then on the underneath we have the serial number 12311, which importantly matches the gun. Because the barrels can be swapped, you can actually come across guns with incorrectly matched barrels, which reduces the value of the rifle. You may also encounter barrels with no serial number, and these were generally spares or alternative caliber barrels which were purchased with the guns when they were new but aren't serialised. Then lastly we have a 725. Now I'm not actually sure what that denotes, but I have read references to other numbers being stamped on the barrels as well as the serial numbers. Before I move on to do some testing with the gun, just one final bit of background or history about the Mark II service. Now, one of the things that people tend to think of most or associate with this gun is it being used for military training, but there isn't actually a wealth of information to support that, and it's quite likely that it never actually happened. So to give some context, various countries had used air guns for training purposes, including Germany and Czechoslovakia, who were doing so at this time period during the 1930s, and in fact Britain itself had experimented in this area using small numbers of BSA military pattern air rifles for troop training prior to the First World War, and Webley themselves had actually submitted their Mark I rifle to the Ministry of Defence for trials in relation to finding an air gun for field gun training in the 1920s, although that subsequently lost out to a BSA rifle. Now, the fact that this has got service in the name and it has features reminiscent of the British infantry rifle of the time, the SMLE, such as the bolt handle and distinctive stock socket, it definitely gives off a military-esque impression. But in reality, the only evidence, or I should probably say the only confirmed reference to it being used for military training, was on a poster on the back of an instruction booklet that came with various Webley guns in the 70s and 80s, some 40 or so years later. I have one such leaflet here for the Webley Vulcan air rifle, and if I open it up you can see on the back some of the guns and rifles that made Webley famous, including the Mark II service here, and about that it says it became known as the service air rifle because it was purchased in large numbers by the forces to train recruits in the basics of shooting, thus avoiding the expense and danger of using live ammunition. I'm now going to test the accuracy of the rifle. I'm going to fire 10 of these 16 grain Air Arms Diablo field pellets at one of these 14cm square targets at a distance of around 12 meters, and I'll start with the standard open sights. Here I have my target. Now the overall group is just over 2 inches or 5.5 centimeters. Now the pellets are quite evenly spread within that group, but 8 out of the 10 pellets are in a group of just under 1.5 inches or 3.5 centimeters within this central black area. Now the Mark II Service was famed for its accuracy in adverts at the time, even at relatively long distances. Now whilst mine isn't bad, it's not fantastic, but I think I can forgive it for a slight loss of accuracy given the age of the rifle. But let's see if we can tighten up that grouping using the aperture sight. Here I have that target. Now the accuracy is definitely better using the aperture sight. The overall grouping is now slightly smaller at 2 inches or 5 centimeters, but most of the pellets are grouped tighter within that. I'm now going to test the power by firing another 10 of those 16 grain Air Arms Diablo field pellets over the chronograph. Here I have my chronograph test sheet, and I've already done all of my calculations. With those 16 grain Air Arms Diablo field pellets, I got an average velocity of 414.5 feet per second with a spread of 15.4 feet per second. The highest being 420.9 feet per second and the lowest being 405.5 feet per second. Now using that average of 414.5 feet per second, that gives me a power of 6.11 foot-pounds. Now I can't find any sources which document what power these were supposed to achieve when they were new, but I have found some reliable testing data which states that in 2.2 they were supposed to shoot at a velocity of 550 feet per second, although I don't know what weight of pellet that was with. So based on that, my rifle here is slightly underpowered, but there's still plenty of power for plinking and target shooting, and a spread of just 15.4 feet per second is pretty good. So there you've seen the Webley Mark II Service air rifle. Now overall I think this is a fantastic gun. It's very nice to shoot, it's extremely well made, and it still has reasonable accuracy and power. Now whilst it is definitely a slightly out of date design, I think that's actually one of the things that I like about it, and that old trope of they don't make them like this anymore definitely rings true of the Mark II Service. Now even though there were only around 16,000 of these made 80 odd years ago, they are readily available on the second-hand market, in the UK at least, although they do cost a bit more than the £4 they were new in 1932. Now price depends primarily on condition, the number of barrels and the presence of a case. On average, a kind of a good general condition one will go for £600 to £700, but if it's not in very good condition or is maybe missing or has replacement parts, it could be more like £300 or £400. But a really nice cased example with all 3 caliber barrels is worth £1,500 or more. On a slight side note, I've referenced Christopher Thrale's book Webley Air Rifles 1925 to 2005 several times during this video, and that is because I think this is the best resource out there for the Mark II service air rifle, and it provided me with a lot of the information for this video. So if you have a Mark II service, or in fact any of the rifles featured in this book, I would strongly recommend getting a copy, and I'll put the ISBN in the description below in case you're interested. So thanks for watching. I hope you found the video interesting. If so, be sure to like, comment and subscribe to the Air Armoury, and until next time, keep your arms in the air.